Good afternoon and welcome to Curiosity Feeds the Cat. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is usually about science and sometimes religion. But every so often, I come across a subject that I find really, really interesting. And because I'm a curious cat, I like to dig a little bit deeper. My guest today is somebody that I actually admire very much, and he's a journalist. Now, I know what you're thinking. You admire a journalist? Well, this is an exceptional journalist. He's an American journalist who came to my attention in 2019 after the release of Leaving Neverland, the TV film based on the allegations of two men who previously stated that Michael Jackson never abused them, but have now changed their story. Now, what I found intriguing is that very few journalists were willing or brave enough to subject their claims to objective scrutiny. However, a few journalists clearly took their job seriously, and John Ziegler was one of them. Having done a fair bit of research on the matter myself and followed John since 2019, I felt it was necessary to invite John onto Curiosity Feeds the Cat and find out a bit more about his research and why, having previously thought Jackson was possibly guilty, he now thinks Jackson is innocent. Welcome, John, and thank you very much for joining us on Curiosity Feeds the Cat.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for that fantastic introduction.
You're very welcome. Now, let me begin by saying your first article criticizing Leaving Neverland was in April 2019, and I believe it was entitled "The News Media's Handling of Leaving Neverland Proves Just How Broken the Entire Media Industry Is." Now, could you kindly explain to our viewers what prompted you to write this article?
Well, for the record, I think I wrote at least one or two before that. In fact, I think my first article for Mediaite, where at the time I was a senior columnist, was something to the effect of, even if Michael Jackson is guilty,
Yes.
Leaving Neverland is incredibly unfair.
Yes.
That was my starting point. I didn't believe at that time that Michael Jackson was guilty. I was basically doing a thought experiment to show how unfair the quote unquote documentary Leaving Neverland really was. In other words, even if you somehow accept that Michael Jackson was a child abuser, which I no longer believe that he was, then just purely from a documentary standpoint, the Leaving Neverland fails on every front. By the time I got to the column that you referenced, I was 1,000% convinced that Leaving Neverland was not just flawed from a documentary perspective; it was a fantasy. It was, by the way, it was not just a fantasy; it was a sick fantasy. It's basically, I think, the most underrated or under discussed part of Leaving Neverland is that it effectively is a pro pedophilia film.
Yes.
And that's the part that's really quite shocking when people get into the reality of this. So anyway, I went. It was a long journey from the time that I was a radio talk show host at KFI in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And that's when the Santa Barbara trial, Michael Jackson's criminal trial, was going on.
I was going to refer to that. Yes.
And we were covering it on almost a daily basis. And at the time, I haven't really thought that much about Michael Jackson as a child molester. I mean, I was a child of the 80s, so like everybody else, I was very much aware of his music and the Thriller phenomenon. And, I didn't hate Michael Jackson, but I wasn't like I was a huge fan. And then as time went on, I mean, let's face it, he got weird. He got really weird. And so that was really, I guess I was in the mode of anything is possible when someone is that weird and that rich and that famous and has that much power over people. And so I was certainly more than open to the idea that he was guilty. And in fact, at one point, I thought he was very likely a child molester because I bought into a couple of the myths. I guess the two myths that I bought into that sound very compelling on their surface, but really are not when you get into the details, are one, the settlement of a civil case of many millions of dollars, And
yes.
then two,
50 million, yes.
and then two, the alleged depiction by one of the alleged victims of Michael Jackson's genitalia. And that turned out to be a total and complete fraud and is now a proven fraud. In fact, that depiction, first of all, when we were told about it in the news media, we were told that it was somehow this tremendous evidence of guilt when it was never any evidence of guilt, because the depiction was comical.
It was ludicrous. Yes,
it was an absurd. It was basically a description of a mushroom, and it was totally wrong as far as the circumcision was concerned, as we found out when Michael Jackson passed away. So, those two things had always been the basis of my not strong belief, but I mean, okay, at that time in my life, I was actually pretty naive when it came to prosecutions, and I thought, well, why would the prosecution be doing this unless there was something to it?
Yes.
But I do remember when covering the trial, how I was completely unimpressed by the evidence that was being presented. And in fact, when the verdict came down and he was not guilty, I didn't have a problem with the verdict, but I presumed that it was a legal. I don't know if it wouldn't be a technicality, because reasonable doubt is not a technicality, but that he could have been guilty, but just not proven, and that the verdict itself was correct. And then I never gave it much thought after that. Of course, you got to also remember that when Michael Jackson was acquitted in Santa Barbara, with by the way, a basically mostly white jury.
All of them, pretty much.
Yeah, I think there might have been a Hispanic. I'm not sure. Okay, about that. It was certainly it was not about anybody's stretch of imagination like the O.J. Simpson case, which
completely different.
Where and I think O.J. Played a large role in the perception of Michael Jackson's acquittal. Even though they were two totally different situations in two totally different places, Los Angeles versus Santa Barbara, it was perceived, I think, especially nationally, as, oh, here we go, another celebrity being let off by a jury system that's enamored by a celebrity. And in this case, a black celebrity. And, OJ was obviously guilty as hell, and somehow he got off. And so the credibility of the acquittal, I think, was for Michael was diminished by OJ. I mean, remember, it was only 10 years later, or about thereabouts. And so that specter was still hanging over the head of the judicial system, especially in Southern California. So we fast forward now to Leaving Neverland. And, again, I hadn't thought much about Michael Jackson at all from a legal perspective in the 15 years or whatever it was since the trial. And so I went in, I purposely did not research anything about those who were in the movie or the director or anything, because I just wanted to, that's kind of my MO, I guess. I want to give every possible benefit of the doubt to someone who is making a case before I start to attack it or get prejudiced against it or whatever. And so I found it at first to be compelling because it's done. Leaving Neverland is done in a very emotional way, and
it appeals to your emotion. Yes,
right, and it seems at first to be compelling and credible, and that's before you watch the whole 4 hours. Because in my estimation, once you watch the whole 4 hours without knowing anything, you have to start having doubts about it. But then when you delve into who these people are, what their history is, and what was not in the movie, then you start to realize, okay, this is a flat out fraud. And as I said, the most remarkable part of the Leaving Neverland fraud is not just that they got away with using Oprah Winfrey to sanctify a bunch of lies about a dead man, which should be unfair and inappropriate in the major news media to begin with. But it really is a pro-pedophilia film. The entire basis of the film, the entire basis. And I honestly don't know, is it because Dan Reed, the director, is in favor of pedophilia at some level, or whether or not this was the only way he could make his case? I don't know this, but But let me just finish. Let me just finish this point, and then then I'll shut up. Then I'll shut up. I don't know whether it's because he's in favor of pedophilia or because this is the only way he can make his case. But the basis of the case is that this was an enjoyable experience for the two victims. And that is why they never said anything, and that they were in love with Michael Jackson. In fact, one of them even got married to Michael Jackson, which is so insanely absurd on so many levels and has no evidence behind it whatsoever. And so, and because that's the only way they can get around this idea that these teenage boys never told anybody. These heterosexual, very heterosexual teenage boys were continually sexually molested by a massive celebrity who, by the way, was already being sued and being tried. I mean, there was, in other words, there were plenty of opportunities along their lives for them to go, aha, me too. Let me tell you about my story, and I'm going to make a lot of money from this. And they never did that.
They never did.
It's an absurdity on its face, especially when there's no evidence to contradict or to overcome that threshold. So anyway, that's my basic response to your question, and now I'll shut up. And you can
no, please. Thank you very much for all that. It's funny because I have some notes, and you've literally almost covered half of it. Because I had a list of questions that I was going to ask.
You can still ask those questions. That's fine.
I will, because I really wanna flesh this out. But before I forget, what you spoke about regarding the whole "we were in love" narrative. There is a lot of evidence that they actually lifted that from a book written by a guy called Victor Gutierrez, who was actually sued by Michael Jackson and who actually left the country rather than pay the 2.7 million that the courts said he owed to Jackson for essentially writing a book that he claimed was based on Jordan Chandler's diary called "Michael Jackson Was My Lover." So I think you're probably right in saying that they came up with the "we were in love" narrative in order to get around the statute of limitation, because that essentially allows them to say, we didn't know it was wrong. Now, like you said, my question is, if you're sitting in a court of law, having to defend somebody against the same things that you claim were done to you, no matter how much in love you were, you must think, oh, well, hold on a second. First of all, you'd have to think he was cheating on me. He was in love with somebody else as well, right? And then think, clearly there's something wrong with this. Obviously, the 1993 allegation was, headline news. So they were aware of that. Like you said, the 2005 trial was probably the most famous trial that I can think of, even more famous than OJ. And still, the penny didn't drop. I personally find that hard to believe. I think that they had to say we didn't know it was wrong because it gives them more time, because I think the statute of limitations says you're allowed to claim later if you didn't know it was wrong. And I think that was a legal ploy that they had to employ. As regards Dan Reed, I'm going to get onto that later, because the whole thing for me is really, really strange. But I wanted to go back to the thing you said about the pictures, the photos that they took of Michael Jackson's genitals. Now, let's even assume that the drawing didn't look ridiculous and it didn't look like a mushroom, like drawn by a 5-year-old. Let's even say it was drawn and it looked like, a wiener. The thing is, like Scott Ross said, if the drawing matched the pictures that the police took, he would have been arrested on the spot. It's essentially like them coming to your house with a search warrant looking for drugs. They found it, and then they say, oh, we'll come back later. How likely is that to have happened? He would have been arrested on the spot. They never did. Strangely, there is also a lot of documentation. I have loads of clips about this, where they actually, in the newspapers, they tell you the pictures may actually clear Jackson because they didn't match. So we knew then that it didn't match. But strangely, these myths just perpetuate and go on and on and on. What I found really strange about the Jackson allegation is there was so much that was not true, that was continuously recycled in the media. Now, I thought it was really interesting that you covered the 2005 trial, because I read the transcripts and I was absolutely, we have a saying in England, I was gobsmacked. Basically, I was so stunned, I was speechless, because I actually thought maybe he got away with it on some technicality, or maybe the case was just, but it was actually really, really, really bad. Tom Mesereau, I don't know if you remember this, did something quite unusual. He didn't actually go for reasonable doubt. He did something that I've never known a defense lawyer to ever do, which is he said in his opening statement, he promised the jury that he would prove Jackson to be innocent. I thought it was crazy when I read that why would an attorney even take that risk? And having read the transcripts, I actually think he proved what he set out to do. Now, going back to my notes, because I have to do this, you mentioned the 93 settlement as one of the, I suppose, one of the bones of contention that you initially had. Have you had any more, do you know even more about what actually led to Jackson having to settle the 93 civil suit? And if you do, would you like to explain to my viewers, please?
Well, I certainly have talked to Tom Mesereau a lot about that. In fact, my relationship with Tom Mesereau played a significant role in, I guess, my evolution on the entire case. Tom and I actually got to know each other a little bit.
Okay.
Because I had raised a totally different, similar case with him, and his response to that I thought was quite intelligent, and my interaction with him indicated to me that he was a good person, a very smart guy. I've always thought he was super smart, and obviously did a great job with Michael Jackson's defense. But I got the feeling that he was an honest person. I don't think too many people, especially celebrity lawyers, are honest. And look, I'll be the first to acknowledge that the 93 settlement was obviously a mistake. I'm not suggesting that it was a good idea. What really kind of shifted in my mind, one was, first of all, the nature of the allegation had no real credibility. And so from a substance standpoint, it doesn't have that much impact on me. But, we're living in a world where simplicity is so important. I mean, it's hard to get beyond the most obvious thing. And if you're spending tens of millions of dollars on a settlement, then that at some level means you must be guilty, right? To the average person, that means you must be guilty. But what you must do is you must be able to understand the calculus that was involved regarding Michael Jackson at that time. He had an insane amount of money. So that amount of money to him had nowhere near the same value that it would to you or me, nowhere near. And number two, it wasn't a matter of how much money he was willing to pay to settle this thing. It was an issue of how much money was he going to potentially lose going forward if he didn't settle the allegation. So by settling the allegation, the theory was, look, we put this aside, even though we know this is a BS allegation. If this is not a headache for us publicly, then we're going to make so much more money going forward that it'll pay for the settlement itself. This is my interpretation, but but I think that's what the thinking was. And then there's the issue of how the civil settlement would relate to a criminal case, and so when you think about it, from the context of what the circumstances were at the time, it actually does make some sense. And again, I don't think it was the right move. I mean, I would never, just on a principle standpoint, I would never give a dime to someone who was making a false allegation against me. I would fight like hell against it. But I can understand how that decision would be come to. Now, there's been some. I've never been able to fully understand what the insurance company's role in that was. I've gotten kind of differing views on that, so I don't I don't know for 100% what the truth on that is, because as I said, I've kind of heard differing perspectives on that. But it almost doesn't matter to me because I understand why the settlement was made now, and most importantly, if we're going to talk about simplicity, right? If the anti-Michael Jackson side is going to say he settled, therefore he's guilty, my response to that is I'll match your simplicity with, here's the most famous and richest entertainer of his generation with access to thousands of kids and the ability to get away with it if this is what he was doing with incredible ease. And you're telling me that to this day you only have 4 semi-credible accusers when there's this much money on the table? Right there, to me, that's game, set, match. There's no possible way that Michael Jackson, if he was a serial pedophile, only abused 4 people who all these years later after his death are willing to come forward and say, yeah, he did this. And by the way, I'm being generous with the number 4. In Leaving Neverland, there are only 2, and they're doing so as part of literally $1 billion lawsuit. And so they have a massive conflict of interest. And as I've already said, their statements completely contradict not just their actions, not just their words, but their actions for decades after the alleged abuse. And so I don't believe that they were ever abused by Michael Jackson. And the court system has thrown out effectively, at least at this point, their claims. And so
they're appealing again. Yes, but
right. But the reality is that Leaving Neverland was based on a lie. And if you understand the basic facts and logic of the case, it's very obvious that is in fact the truth.
Here's thank you for that. Here's what I found out about the 93 settlement, because that really bothered me. And it was very easy to assume that it was a case of, we stand to lose a lot of money, therefore just give them what they want and they'll go away. Now, I don't know if you know that a journalist called Mary Fisher wrote an article in 1994 for GQ, basically laying out how the first allegation was an extortion, a successful one. I read that and I thought, I want to find out some more. What eventually transpired is that I discovered that actually before Jackson settled in 1994, there was a negotiation going between Jackson and the boy's father, not the boy. There was negotiations for money. It was essentially, give me some money or I'm going to accuse you of molesting my son, before the boy ever made any allegations. So there's taped conversations between the boy's father and the boy's stepfather, where the boy's father is essentially saying what he's going to do if he doesn't get what he wants. I'll quote verbatim. If I don't get what I want, it will be a massacre. What else could the father of an abused child want apart from justice? It will be a massacre if I don't get what I want. That has to have anybody thinking they have him on tape. They wrote a book after the settlement where essentially they're saying, had Michael Jackson paid the $20 million demanded of him, the case would have never even been in the public. Now, regarding the civil and criminal situation that you spoke about, I actually think they played him perfectly, because like you said, they sued him civilly in I think it was September or October 93. He actually refused to pay for nearly 4 or 5 months. At one point, they were willing to take $1 million, and he refused. Then they were negotiating script writing deals. I mean, think about it, John. Who in their right mind would say, "You abused my son, therefore let's negotiate a script writing deal"? And it's insane. This is all on tape. But they played him perfectly, because what happened then is they sued him civilly. They then the judge refused to delay the civil trial until criminal investigations were complete. Jackson's team actually filed several motions to delay the civil trial, because I think there's something called the 120-day rule, where if it's a minor, they have to have a trial within 120 days. And Jackson's team were essentially saying, hold the civil trial so we can defend ourselves in the criminal trial, and then it makes the civil trial redundant. Anyway, they refused. And they also allowed the criminal prosecution access to Jackson's deposition, which effectively would have given his defense away. So I think that, more than anything, was the problem. He was in a sort of like a legal cul-de-sac, if you like. If I don't settle, sorry, go on.
No, I think you're right, and I actually think that the deposition issue is underrated, because when you have the defendant's deposition in this situation, you have him locked into where he was at any particular time, and so you can then pick. I'm a big believer. I'm a big believer in these cases that when and where something allegedly happened is everything. If you can't tell me when and where it happened, then I'm inherently very suspicious. And so once you have the defendant's deposition, you can, although with Michael Jackson, it's probably more complex because he's so famous and so traveled all over the world, and his whereabouts are pretty well known. But once you have that, then you can kind of reverse engineer your story to fit his deposition.
Yeah.
And it takes away the biggest defense, or maybe at this point, the only defense a lot of accused people have is, I wasn't there at that time and place.
Yeah.
And so once you get Jackson on the record in a particular set of circumstances, it becomes far easier to construct your story in a way where he can't defend himself. Yeah. So I think that's one of many, many, many problems with this. And again, I have already, look, people can get into the details, and the details are important and interesting. But to me, in my mind, the settlement is already pretty much irrelevant. I went from being from being someone who thought that the settlement was everything to now, again, in the big picture, how do you get around the fact that we have so few accusers, and that these accusers are so lacking in credibility? If Michael Jackson, I cannot emphasize this enough. If Michael Jackson really was a serial pedophile, the number of accusers would be far greater. And within that group, there would be some who had extraordinary credibility. There would be some who wrote a journal, or at least told their parents, or told their friends, or somehow got physical evidence. I mean, and this was a guy who was being targeted, by parents for money all the time. And so I guess the biggest myth in these kind of cases, and I've seen it happen in other ones. I've done a lot of work on the Penn State Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky case, which has similarities. The biggest myth, in my opinion, is that kids, especially heterosexual teenage boys, are not going to say anything to anybody about being sexually abused on multiple occasions. And by the way, continue to go back to this person many, many, many times, and never tell anybody, and never think, not only is this wrong, but I could get a crap load of money if I come forward. I mean, it's insane. I mean, what the media thinks, and this is where the media gets it not just wrong, but they get the 100% opposite of the truth. They think that because someone is a respected figure in the community, and obviously Jackson, a global superstar, that somehow that gives them godlike powers to keep these people quiet.
Yeah,
When in fact it's the exact opposite. Because they are famous and because they have money or they're associated with organizations that have money, there's actually a massive incentive to come forward
to talk,
to stories, whether they're true or not true. Because I mean, whether it's in the kid's interest or the parent's interest or guardian, whatever, someone's going to go, wow, this is going to work out very, very well for us. And so there's no possible, and in fact, I mean, one of the many questions I'd love to ask Dan Reed is, so how is it that you do this film? You now have two accusers, Wade Robson and James Stapechuk, and not one other person comes forward. You get worldwide publicity for this. In fact, it's implied in the film. That other people will come forward. Reed talked about doing a sequel, which has never happened and probably never will, because he was presuming that somehow all these years after Jackson's death, as if the people he would have abused wouldn't have been aware that Jackson is dead. Or, I mean, it's now safe to come forward. Why is it that nobody else came forward? Not one person. That's not possible under the narrative on which your film is based. It's not possible.
I think that he was hoping that somebody else would jump on the money bandwagon. I think they probably gambled that it seemed so lucrative to make accusations, because there were a lot of accusations in Jackson's lifetime that was so clearly false. I mean, there was a boy in Canada who had such detailed information about Neverland, but it turned out not only had he never been, he was being coached by another pedophile called Rodney Allen. So people already knew, like you said, that they could say anything about Michael Jackson, and then there was money involved. We know the media were paying people to make stuff up. So you are absolutely spot on. That how is it that all of a sudden nobody else has come forward? And I suspect the reason nobody else has come forward is they probably thought, oh crap, there's so much scrutiny. We cannot get away. We thought we were going to get away with this. We thought we were going to tell this story. We thought there was going to be no objective scrutiny. Michael Jackson fans, I mean, wow. It's remarkable what they've done. But obviously, clearly, with journalists like yourself, like Charles Thompson, who's also written extensively about this, I don't think they were expecting any pushback. That's what I think. I mean, I could be wrong. No,
look, I don't know. I think the pushback has been much better than I expected, and you're right. It's been driven by basically a couple different forces. The Michael Jackson fans are amazing. I mean, I am in awe. And by the way, in 98% of the cases, it's not about their fandom for Michael Jackson. They are very substance-based, truth-oriented. They do not, I'm used to dealing with cults. Okay. I've dealt with some cult-like behavior. And, in cults, they jump on everything that they think favors their side, regardless of whether it's true or not. I have not found that to be the case with Michael Jackson fans. They are very fact-based, truth-based, substantive-based. And it's because of them that the counter narrative to Leaving Neverland has gotten any traction at all. Charles Thompson has done an amazing job. Taj Jackson and the Jackson family has done a really good job of pushing back. Tom Mesereau has also pushed back. And so whether or not that was the reason why there weren't other allegations, maybe not. I actually think it's a factor of one. You got to remember, anybody that would have been sexually abused by Michael Jackson under Dan Reed's narrative. Of course, he had to change his narrative because the facts of his film didn't fit as far as the age and the timing of these allegations. The narrative of the film is that Michael Jackson liked these prepubescent boys.
Yes.
But then James Safechuck's allegation doesn't make any sense unless he's 16 years old, where he's getting abused at the train station, which didn't exist and living at the Neverland Ranch at that point. But anyway, his narrative is prepubescent boys. Well, Michael Jackson's been dead for quite a while now. So anybody who was in that category, right, is very much into adulthood at this point. And presumably, I would submit if they were really abused, they already would have come forward a long time ago.
Yes.
But there's another factor with regard to Michael Jackson, which is in order to have any semblance of evidence that you're abused by Michael Jackson, you have to prove that you had a relationship with Michael Jackson. You have to have photographs or video or whatever. And while a lot of kids visited, the Neverland Ranch.
Neverland, yes.
That was a pretty isolated bubble. And so, in other words, in order to get close enough to Michael Jackson to be abused, and by the way, I'm quite certain that after the allegations started to roll in, he cut back on those that had access to the Neverland Ranch. I mean, he
was hardly ever there.
Right. Well, that's the other thing. He was hardly ever there. But my point here is that the pool of people that have proof of access to Michael Jackson and a time period when he wouldn't have been, very much concerned about false allegations is pretty small. And I don't believe any of them were abused. So, but even under those circumstances, even I am shocked that there wasn't one person that thought, this didn't really happen, but I have some pictures of me and Michael Jackson, and I'll get a lot of attention, and I'll latch on to this lawsuit that's $1 billion plus. Who knows what might happen? Maybe it'll work out for me. No one did that, which is amazing. And I have to say, the only explanation I can come up with is that the people that were in that category who could have made a false allegation have so much admiration and respect and love for Michael Jackson that they couldn't bring themselves to do it.
Well,
Brett Barnes is a great example of that. I mean, he's basically implicated in the movie for all intents and purposes.
Yes.
For all intents and purposes, Dan Reed claims that Brett Barnes was abused, and Brett Barnes has maintained that he was not abused. By the way, I posited I've never talked about this publicly before, but I posited a strategy that Brett Barnes could entrap Dan Reed by claiming falsely that he was accused by Michael Jackson, and have Dan Reed jump all over that as he would have, and then come out and say, no, it never happened. By the way, here's my tape that I made with the Jackson estate before I did my interview with Dan Reed, planning to expose him as a fraud by effectively doing a sting operation. That never happened, but it was an interesting idea that I think was thought about, at least because I did raise it with some interesting people, and I wish it would have happened because I know it would have worked. I guarantee you. I guarantee you that if Brett Barnes had told Dan Reed, "Hey, I want to talk to you about my relationship with Michael Jackson," and indicated that he was a victim, Dan Reed would have jumped all over that. And by the way, while that plan, to my knowledge, never went anywhere, there was another another group of people who were planning a sting of Dan Reed that was extraordinarily involved and intricate, and I thought almost ingenious. But I don't know what happened with it, because they asked for my advice, and I gave it to them, and I was quite impressed with what they were doing. But I don't know if it ever went anywhere. It may have not gone anywhere. I don't know. But the reality is that if Brett Barnes had had ever talked to Dan Reed, he would have jumped on it 100% and would have been full hook, line, and sinker. But again, the guy puts Barnes in his movie, implying he's a victim, and he has never ever done anything but be very defensive of Michael Jackson, even to this day.
I was going to say that regarding the whole younger boys narrative, just like you mentioned previously, the train station debacle kind of forced Dan Reed to pretty much throw Safechuck under the bus and say, oh, well, it didn't stop when he was 14. It went on until he was an adult. He actually went on a podcast and said, oh, yeah, it was just, it just continued. It was just the same people that he was having sex with while they were young. He carried on till they were adults. What's also interesting about that is that, they claim that he likes to replace the boys with even younger boys. It turns out that, at least in Robson's case, Macaulay Culkin and Brett Barnes are both older than Robson. But here's the interesting thing, based on what you were saying earlier. This is what we have to believe, if Dan Reed is correct. In the 2005 trial, Michael Jackson basically put all his victims on the stand. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
100%. And let me just first address the train station thing, and then what your second point is also very, very important. I was shocked when Dan Reed did what he did with regard to the train station revelation. And for those who are unaware, effectively, James Safechuck had listed the train station as one of the places where Michael Jackson had abused him, except there was a big problem, and that is that the train station did not exist during the time period, and it wasn't close. And during the time period in which Safechuck supposedly had been abused. Now, I thought that the natural reaction to that would be they really couldn't claim that the train station existed, because that was very well documented in numerous ways. So I figured what Reed would simply say was, well, it's PTSD, and he didn't remember. He didn't remember, because one of the beauties of these fake victim allegations is that being a victim itself is an excuse for why you can't remember anything properly, because that's what PTSD supposedly does, which, by the way, I've never understood the PTSD. PTSD has replaced repressed memory, which got discredited in court. And so now the therapists all say PTSD, but nobody ever suggests that if you have an event that causes PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that you forget what happened or the details of what happened. It's not like you ever forget, oh, I was in Iraq and I got hit with a bombshell. I mean, and that's why I have PTSD. I mean, that no one does that. That's not part of what PTSD is. You do remember it, but it may have caused you some level of permanent stress afterwards, which I'm okay, fine. But that doesn't get you off the hook for not remembering massive details. And so I honestly thought, to me, that was when I first realized, oh, Dan Reed is not just wrong about this, he's dumb. I mean, it was from a strategic standpoint. I mean, because that's always been the playbook. That's on the first page of the playbook. If any details don't match, just say, oh, we misremembered because of the PTSD.
Oprah tried it, yes. Oprah said something similar.
Right. So the details never are supposed to matter. Of course, details have to matter, because in an allegation that where it's one person's word against another person, especially when that person is dead, then the details have to matter, especially when it's an old allegation. And so, anyway, so that I thought to be very important, because it really exposed that Dan Reed is not a smart person, and that's now my current belief system regarding Dan Reed, that he's flat out dumb. He's corrupt and dumb. And so that's my assessment of Dan Reed. As far as the second issue, which I'm now forgetting, which was the second issue you brought up with regard to?
I said essentially what they're trying to say is if we are led to believe that what Dan Reed and the rest of them are claiming is true, which is that both Macaulay Culkin and Brett Barnes were abused by Jackson, they're essentially now claiming that in 2005, in the trial of his life, Jackson essentially said, "Yeah, you can have the guys that I really did abuse. Knock yourself out."
Right. Thank you. I'm sorry that
that's okay.
My train of thought got lost there, but yeah, because this is another big issue to me, especially given my relationship with Tom Mesereau. Because Tom Mesereau, here's what you also have to believe. You have to believe that Tom Mesereau, one of the smartest and best criminal defense attorneys in the world, decides to put on the stand as the star, the first, basically the centerpiece of Michael Jackson's defense. His life is on the line. Mesereau has said publicly that a conviction for Michael Jackson is a death sentence.
It's a death sentence, absolutely.
Because he can't go to prison given who he is, and so he decides to put on the stand one of if Dan Reed is right, one of Michael Jackson's worst victims. In other words, one of the people he abused worst of anybody, most blatantly, and Wade Robson, because Wade Robson was one of the first witnesses. One of the first. I think he might have been the first witness.
He was the first one. Yes.
Okay, so he's the first witness. The first witness for the defense is somebody who had been brutally abused by Michael Jackson. Tom Mesereau is nowhere near dumb enough for that to even be a.
Homer Simpson wouldn't do that.
Right. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. And there's so many problems with Wade Robson and his story. But frankly, and I said this almost immediately on the Glenn Beck radio show, which is a major national radio show.
I saw that.
Okay, here in America. And I think I shocked him because he was kind of buying into the allegations at the time. Yeah, but I said, if we're going to believe Wade Robson, we might as well throw out our entire legal system because there's nobody who is more on the record in both a legal and non-legal standpoint as an adult for not having been abused by Michael Jackson than Wade Robson. He testified at his criminal trial. Yeah. He was asked very specific questions.
Yes, he was.
Under oath, and defended Jackson to the hilt. And I also, and this gets a little bit more controversial and risky, but can we please look at Wade Robson's personal narratives? And I'm not just talking about the fact that he had a massive incentive to make an allegation when the Jackson estate didn't give him the choreography job in Las Vegas that he was expecting and even bragging about. That's clearly what motivated him later on into becoming a quote unquote victim. But can we please look at what his story is based upon what we know of his life? So his story is that he gets abused by Michael Jackson for an extended period of time, right before he hits puberty, right? And so he's being brutally, horribly sexually abused. Now, Dave Chappelle, the comedian, does a great job of making a joke, and I think illustrating how absurd Wade Robson's allegations is, and he says, I don't believe him. But if you believe Wade Robson's story, so he's in the prepubescent era of his life, and he's simultaneously being abused by Michael Jackson brutally, while also engaging in a very sweet puppy love turned into real romance relationship with Michael Jackson's niece, Brandy, who Michael Jackson set him up with, right? And by the way, they're dating for a very long time before they have an intimate relationship. So that, by the way, right there, I mean, there's so many problems, but right there, how does that make any sense? Because if Wade Robson is having full-on sex for as much as you could conceive of a prepubescent boy engaging in full-on sex with Michael Jackson, and yet he's having this very sweet relationship with Brandy Jackson, where there is apparently no intimacy for quite a while.
Yes.
Until they're into the mid-late teen stages. And they engage in this, Brandy and Wade engage in this very long, seems like I said, at the time, at least at the time, very sweet relationship.
Yeah, like a courtship.
Right. That far exceeds the dates of the Michael Jackson relationship. So he continues on with this relationship with Brandy. But then here's the kicker. Then after he ends the relationship with Brandy, and Brandy is completely convinced, as when I interviewed her, and that was a big moment for me personally, completely convinced that he's not just lying in the movie, he's laughing during the movie because she can tell when he's holding back laughter at some of the allegations that he's making. She knows he's totally lying. But for me, and again, this takes a leap. I mean, it's not a leap of logic, but it requires people to actually follow basic logic and the way human beings work. So not long after the relationship with Brandy and Wade Robson ends, Wade Robson, who is by this point a very well-known dancer, I mean, he's a semi-celebrity of his own, he starts working for Britney Spears. And Britney Spears is dating Justin Timberlake at the time. And Britney Spears cheats on Justin Timberlake with Wade Robson. Now, I'm sorry, but everything we have ever been told about victims of child sex abuse, especially the abuse as described by Robson, would make the relationship with Brandy semi-impossible, but the relationship with Spears completely impossible because the level of confidence, and the level of confidence as a man that you would have to have in your sexuality to have Britney Spears cheat on Justin Timberlake with you is just, it's mind-blowing, and it's completely inconsistent with the idea. You know what it is consistent with? It's consistent with a guy who, as he was coming of age, became very well known because he was friends with Michael Jackson. And that would imbue in a young boy an enormous amount of confidence, the type of confidence that would enable you to potentially have an affair with Britney Spears at the height of her fame while she's dating Justin Timberlake, another famous person. That makes sense. But the idea that of the timeline that I just gave you, and the evolution of Michael Jackson brutally abusing him for years, then overlapping a relationship with Brandy Jackson that goes on for several more years, and then a relationship right after that with Britney Spears, to me, there's just no way. They're just making.
Sorry, carry on.
No, it just doesn't make any sense, and there's no evidence for it. See, I'm willing to accept things that make no sense at all if there's some level of evidence, but in this case, it makes absolutely no sense, and there's no evidence, and there's a massive financial incentive to lie.
Of course.
So all those three things, it's game, set, match. Wade Robson's a liar.
Here's the interesting thing. Dan Reed could turn around and say, well, maybe they were not brutally abused. It was because he actually said it was quite pleasant.
Well, that's part of why he has to go with this absurd narrative that pedophilia is good. I mean, that's why people should look up Dave Chappelle's comedy routine on this, because he says it far better than I ever could.
I saw that.
Well, and I think Dave Chappelle said it best, where, I mean, it's just, it's absurd and it's almost funny when you look at it from the perspective of reality.
Well, the interesting thing is that obviously in the film they claimed that he kept them separated from women. So the idea that he kept them separated from women and then turns around and says, "Oh, guess what, Wade? I'm going to introduce you to my niece, and you guys are going to date for, I don't know, 7 to 8 years." You would think at the very least she would have been in the film. I mean, the thing that you were so very, very good in bringing to everyone's attention who read your article is the lack of balance, because there should be a case of, here's what they're saying, if it's a documentary anyway, and here's the evidence that might cast some doubt on that. Certainly, Brett Barnes should have been in the film, as should have Macaulay Culkin, because if you're saying somebody's a victim, then I think you should at the very least put their what they say on film. If they're saying no, it didn't happen, you should put them in the film and say, this is what they're saying, this is what these other lot are saying. I mean, to be honest with you, John, it's crazy. I saw your interview with Brandy Jackson. Actually, that was really when I first started following you, because I thought, okay, here's a journalist. In my world, serious allegations deserve serious scrutiny. In a civilized society, this should be normal, right? It should go without saying that if somebody is making a claim, especially if they've changed their story and they now want money, because they're suing for money. I mean, there's been news that it's $1 billion. There's actually no monetary amount, because I imagine that is something that is discovered that has to be decided later. But they're certainly suing for triple damages, saying, oh, loss of earnings and trauma and all sorts of things. So it is interesting. The other question I actually wanted to ask you is,
well, hold on a second. Before you get to that question, let's just amplify what you just said, because everything you just said is true. But then also we have to consider the allegations are about a man who is dead, yes, who was acquitted unanimously at a trial. Mm-hmm. So those two things should also push the threshold for the demand for actual evidence to be far greater. So you have old allegations with a massive monetary incentive to lie about someone who is dead and who was already acquitted in a court of law. We already did this. They had their shot, and it didn't work because the jury said it wasn't true. So that ought to mean something. Just because we wait 14 years, it doesn't erase that.
Of course. I completely agree with you, John. But here's the problem that I found doing my own research. The media did a very good job of hiding why Jackson was acquitted, I think. It's not a coincidence that Charles Thompson actually wrote an article about this in 2010. And the title tells you everything you need to know. One of the most shameful episodes in journalistic history. They did a very good job of essentially poo-pooing what happened in that courtroom. So when you say Jackson was acquitted, most people, even myself included, actually, I originally thought, oh, okay, maybe he just got away with it. It was only when I started to do my own homework and I thought, oh my God, there should have never even been a trial. It was ridiculous. The basis of what they were claiming in that trial was actually in itself was insane. So like what you're saying is the fact that he's been acquitted should matter, but it didn't matter because to most people, they just equated it with OJ. It happens on Twitter all the time. The moment you say he was acquitted, they say, oh, so was OJ. And so most people have no idea how strong his defense was, how ridiculous the allegations against him in 2005 were. And like you said, the fact that they're changing their story, it's an old story, the fact that they want money should be a red flag in a rational society. Sadly, I don't think we live in a rational society, because if we did, you wouldn't have to do what you do. You think about it, John. Out of all the journalists in the world, we can probably count on one hand the amount of people who actually subjected Leaving Neverland to objective scrutiny. Isn't that shameful? Really?
Yeah, but unfortunately, it's 100% shameful, but unfortunately, it's not that surprising because of the nature of the subject matter. See, that's the problem here. We're coming off of the Me Too movement, which means that every allegation is inherently supposed to be considered true now. And we're dealing with the worst of sexual abuse allegations because we're dealing with children, and we're dealing with a massive celebrity who's dead and cannot defend himself. And by the way, can't do anything for any of the members of the media that are covering this. You know, when Michael Jackson was alive, the media at least still had to be somewhat fair to him because because there was the elements of the media that he could still help by giving interviews and access, and he still had power and influence, and the media there was still something for the media to use from Michael Jackson. Now, the media coverage of the trial was terrible, and I was even part of that. But now that he's dead, it's Katie bar the door. There's nothing that Michael Jackson can do for anybody in the news media. So there's no fear. He can't do an interview and call people liars. Can you imagine if he was alive? Michael Jackson would have been able to do any interview he wanted and call out Robson and Safechuck as liars.
Yeah, the allegation wouldn't have happened if he was alive, I don't think.
Probably not, because I think it would have been, I don't think that HBO would have felt comfortable airing it. And I don't think Oprah would have participated. Oprah's, we cannot underestimate Oprah's, the power of Oprah's participation. She's nowhere near as influential, certainly with the public, as she used to be. But among the media, she is still considered to be some sort of a saint. And let's face it, the media is incredibly lazy. Most of them are incredibly stupid. They want a simple story. And for them, Oprah sanctifying a story is true. All they have to do is go, well, why would Oprah do this? Oprah was a Michael Jackson fan. Oprah did the 1992 or 3, whatever it was.
92, 93, I think, yes.
Yeah, this massive television event, highest rated interview of its kind in the history of television, with Michael Jackson, ironically, at the Neverland Ranch. And, and this was a huge portion of her career. It was a huge moment in television history. It was the height of Michael Jackson's fame, basically. And so, for her to sanctify these allegations with this post-movie special had incredible power within the media.
Yes.
Because to the media, that meant, there's no real need to give any of this any scrutiny. And by the way, we're far more likely to give it scrutiny because then we're taking on Oprah. And there's no incentive for us to do that. So we're not going to take on Oprah. And so we're just going to have these allegations hang out there unrefuted. And so the Oprah thing, which I'm still not 100% sure why she did this, but I am convinced that she did this far, far more for economic and political reasons than she did for substantive reasons. And
I think she did it for ratings. That's the only thing I can think of.
Well, no, there's really no. She did this on HBO, and HBO really, as a subscriber outlet, it's really not ratings based. And
okay. I didn't know that.
I really don't know that she was going to get evaluated on the ratings of it. I think it was more. I think it was more of a corporate quid pro quo, where there were elements that wanted this story told, and they knew that. And I've always said, I think this is one of the more underrated things I've ever said about Leaving Neverland, which is, if you have a real solid case, you don't need it sanctified by Oprah.
No, you don't.
You don't need that. If you have, the only reason why you bring in Oprah to sanctify, to give her blessing, is if your case is so crappy that you have to do a smoke and mirrors on the media and get them to believe this is all real by, providing Oprah Winfrey as a way of making sure that you don't get any negative blowback or any scrutiny for your story. And so the Oprah element of this is very, very important. She was chosen. She was chosen for very specific reasons. Obviously, she is a Black woman who is a victim of abuse herself, who had a connection to Michael Jackson back in the heyday. She provided great value to this story, but it had nothing to do with the truth of the story. And in fact, I think it had more to do with the opposite.
She did distance herself from Leaving Neverland once all the inconsistencies started to come out. She initially tried to defend it on, I think she was on a show with, I've forgotten, the South African comedian Trevor. Was it Trevor? I can't remember his name now. And she kind of just dismissed it and said, "Oh, what's the big deal if they get days mixed up?" But it's not a day when somebody claims that he was abused regularly in a building that didn't exist at the time. That's a completely different kettle of fish, isn't it? So she distanced herself from it, and I think all mention of Leaving Neverland apparently disappeared from her website. But like you said, if the case was legit, or if it was credible, you wouldn't need somebody to, I suppose, come and greenlight it, if you like. But then again, I suppose maybe they just wanted to blindside everyone. It's an interesting thing. Another question I want to ask you is that obviously you are familiar with not just the train station issue with Safechuck. You mentioned in your articles about when he claimed he told his mum that he was abused.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. Would you just like to elaborate? I don't know if you can recall most of the inconsistencies that you.
Well, I do remember. And I'm not sure this is where you're going, but Safechuck's mom dances on Michael Jackson's grave when he, she tells this vivid story of when she found out that Michael Jackson died. Right?
Yes. Is
this where? Okay, yep. and so to me, this is one of the more telling scenes in the movie, where the mom of James Safechuck is talking about how she wakes up to the news of Michael Jackson's death, which, by the way, would have to be an afternoon nap because this happened in the afternoon on the West Coast. So immediately I'm like, wait a minute, you woke up? I think that's almost exactly what she said.
She did say, yeah.
I woke up to the news of Michael Jackson's death, and I was so happy. Oh, he's fine. That basically, effectively saying my son's abuser is dead. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is there's no evidence that she would have known about it when he died.
Well, of course not.
Based upon Safechuck's own story, and because Safechuck didn't come forward until many years after that, and there's no indication he told anybody personally. In fact, his story is he didn't even, I don't want to misquote him, but my recollection is he either didn't know or didn't remember or didn't think of himself as being abused by Michael Jackson until he saw Wade Robson.
Yeah, that's what he said, yes.
On the Today Show, which was like 4 years or so late after Michael Jackson had died, at least 3 or 4 years after Michael Jackson had died.
2012 or 13, I think.
Well, it was at least 2013 because I remember, it was 2013 because I happened to have been on the Today Show in 2013 talking about a similar case, the Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky, Penn State case, and Matt Lauer had interviewed me and was interviewing Wade Robson.
Oh, okay.
And Matt Lauer's producer had asked me what I thought of Robson and the interview because they had some suspicions about his story not being true. And in the many years since then, I've gotten to know Matt Lauer very, very well. And I can assure you that, and I don't speak for Matt, but I think that Matt would agree with my personal take on Wade Robson, and he was the one that did the interview that James Safechuck supposedly saw and said, oh my gosh, that same thing happened to me. I didn't realize it until right now. And so he joins in Wade Robson's lawsuit against the Jackson estate. So so I think that the mom of James Safechuck saying that in the movie is very, very telling. Mm-hmm. But to me, maybe the biggest smoking gun is the mom of Wade Robson. I think that the most compelling evidence against Leaving Neverland that we found was very simple. We have Facebook posts of Wade Robson's mom liking pro Michael Jackson Facebook posts after Wade Robson goes on the Today Show. Now that right there should be like, what? How is that possible? That right there in a rational world would make most people go, whoa, 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 whoa. But then here's the final nail in the coffin. So I tweet about these Facebook posts where Wade Robson's mom was liking pro Michael Jackson, things like his happy birthday Michael Jackson and Michael Jackson artwork for about a year or so after the Wade Robson Today Show interview that I just referenced. And immediately after I tweet about this, all of a sudden, the Facebook likes have been erased. They're gone. Wade Robson's mom has gone in and unliked all of those posts. Now that is consciousness of guilt. That is that is a cover-up. That is knowing that they got caught. That is going, oops, forgot about that. I still liked Michael Jackson after Wade went on the Today Show because I knew he wasn't telling the truth. And so that to me is one of the more compelling pieces of evidence that came about that, of course, has been ignored by the media, and Dan Reed has never been asked about it.
It really is incredible. I just wanted to run something by you quickly as to my reason, how my research actually began. And I don't know what you think about this, but I had a problem with Robson being a witness in the first place if he had been abused. I just didn't think. I don't even think Homer Simpson would put somebody he abused on the stand to defend him, okay? And that's supposed to be the stupidest character in fiction. But the claim that he took his time to work up the courage to tell Jackson he didn't want to testify, and then a week later he got a subpoena. That was it. That was what done it for me. As soon as I saw that, I was literally screaming at the TV. Like, I swore at the TV because I was like, no, come on, no. Not only would he not be crazy enough to put somebody he abused on the stand, but let's even admit that he could have been that crazy. If this victim then says, I don't want to do it, you subpoena him, John?
Yeah, which of course would be an incredibly massive risk to put that person on the stand.
Honestly.
And Tom Mesereau never would have done it. I asked Tom Mesereau in my video interview, which you can find on YouTube, which is really quite good.
Yeah, I watched it.
It's two parts. It's about an hour long or thereabouts, and I think it's a very good interview on his part. Where and I don't want to misstate his answer, but my recollection of his answer was that was not an accurate representation of what happened, and that he was very confident in putting Wade Robson on the stand, and that there was no controversy about putting Wade Robson on the stand because Wade knew he had never been abused and was very willing to tell his story, and so I mean there's no part of this narrative that makes any sense.
No, it doesn't.
But what you do have to believe that Tom Mesereau is an absolute imbecile, and you have to believe that Michael Jackson is way beyond crazy. I mean, he is a riverboat gambler of epic proportions to not stop. He never says to Tom Mesereau, hey, Tom, maybe we don't put Wade on the stand. I mean, because he knows
maybe we don't put anyone on the stand.
Right. I mean, because I know I abused him for several years. I mean, and who knows, that might come out. It's all laughable. It's laughable,
it is.
But you have to get into the details, and you have to be open minded, and you have to be able to be capable of rational thought. None of those things exist in most of the media. They just want to. They just want the simple story, and the simple story is Michael Jackson was super famous. He seemed to like kids. He was really weird. Wow, seems like a child abuser to me. And
sorry, carry on.
No, and that's as far as it goes. I mean, and there's no benefit to a member of the news media, major member of the news media, who has a lot to risk to confront an alleged victim of child sex abuse, because those people are protected. They have a halo over their head. They have a force field around them. You're not allowed to criticize them, and so that's where we are today. I mean, these false allegations are only going to continue because it's actually getting fairly easy to make them because
it's incredible.
You're immune from criticism, and oftentimes you don't even have to give your identity.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Sorry, John, carry on.
No, it is crazy, and I've seen numerous other cases where false allegations are accepted as true, even when they're obviously not. And in fact, sometimes the most ludicrous allegations are accepted more easily because the person who's being accused thinks, this is so insane, I don't even have to defend myself. And then by the time they realize they're in big trouble, it's too late because the media has accepted the allegation as true. I mean, like, for instance, I mentioned Matt Lauer, who's now a friend of mine. There are millions of Americans that to this day believe that Matt Lauer had an office where he had a button under his desk where he could lock people into the room so he could rape them, and that NBC was aware of this and basically gave him their blessing for that. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, it's completely absurd. Matt never raped anybody. The by the way, just for the record, the button which everybody at Matt Lauer's level NBC had simply kept people from coming into his office to interrupt a meeting and did not keep anyone in the office. And this is a matter of record. Yet I'm telling you, based upon the social media posts I see, millions of people believe this to be true because it was a media narrative that was juicy and I guess made sense to people who don't understand the real world.
Wow. It's anyway, I don't want to take too much of your time. I certainly could talk about this all day. I wanted to touch on something very, very quickly that Safechuck also said about basically he claimed that he refused to testify in 2005. I believe that you mentioned that in your article, why that actually never happened. And also the fact that he claimed that when he refused to testify, Jackson threatened him with lawyers. Now, when I read that, my first thought was, okay, so this is the scenario. He tells Jackson he doesn't want to testify. And then Jackson then goes to Tom Ezra and says, oh, James said I didn't abuse him before. Well, actually, I did abuse him, but now I want him to lie again and he's refusing. Get him. Because that's essentially what he's claiming. But anyway, I want you to, if you kindly can just elaborate quickly on.
I think you said it perfectly. I don't know that there's anything else that needs to be said there. Again, you have to believe. First of all, you have to believe a whole confluence of events that are not consistent with the facts and don't make any sense. But then you have to believe that Tom Ezra is an imbecile and Michael Jackson is a sociopath who is delusional about defending himself, because you don't put people on the stand or try to put people on the stand that you abused in a trial about whether or not you abused young boys. I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of logic. But to me, I think that every part of this is significant. To me, I don't even think that much about James Safechuck, because Safechuck is literally on Wade Robson's bandwagon, right?
Yes.
Literally, I mean, literally, he says, I came to my story by watching Wade on the Today Show. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So once you've discredited Wade, which I think is easily done,
yes,
and has been done in 100 different ways, then Safechuck is pretty much irrelevant. And when he makes the screw up involving the train station, then I'm like, okay, nothing else matters, because we already know that the guy you're hitching your wagon to is a liar. Mm-hmm. You're a liar with regard to the train station, and then the whole wedding ring. That falls apart. And then just add to it the whole idea that they were married and that Michael Jackson gave him a wedding ring, and that's just a ridiculous story to begin with. But also there have been sleuths who have done a pretty good job of indicating that the ring involved, had all sorts of problems. Mm-hmm. That this was not. That he basically was just making the whole story up. And if you look at his reaction when Oprah goes to ask him about this on the HBO after special, he is literally holding back laughter. He literally is holding back laughter.
That is very true.
With everything he possibly can before trying to get very sad and forlorn in keeping with the subject matter. It's a joke. It's literally a joke, as is almost all of the movie Leaving Neverland.
Thank you very much. I was just going to say, knowing what you know now, would you say the media as a whole is trustworthy? I mean, you must admit that journalists like yourself are actually quite rare. And so, I mean, where do we go from here? Because the problem is there's so much that an idiot like me can go online and dig up so much. So why can't the media, at the very least, even if the guy was guilty, give us the information, a balanced, narrative of what's actually going on?
Well, I do a podcast called The Death of Journalism, which comes out twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays here in the United States, which deals with this issue on a twice weekly basis. I believe that the news media is fundamentally and catastrophically broken at almost every level. There are dozens, if not 100 different reasons why this has happened and why it's probably not fixable. A lot of it has to do with economics. And a lot of it has to do with the modern attention span. I mean, there's been a symbiotic relationship between the public's attention span shrinking, then the media's attention span shrinking to match that, and then as the media's attention span shrinks, the public's attention span shrinks, and we get
even further.
We get to the point where, 18-second videos on TikTok of two girls dancing gets millions of views, and an incredibly substantive article debunking a media narrative struggles to get a few thousand views. I mean, that because people just don't have the time or the inclination to get into the details, and the media that therefore we now go into narrative casting when you don't have much time, right? And when you don't have much time because the attention span is too small, and you don't have much money because of the economics, easy, quick, simple narratives are what carry the day. And the simplest narrative with regard to Michael Jackson is huge celebrity, lots of money, loved children, super weird, must have been a child abuser. That's the narrative. Now, to be fair, I don't know how much of the public really totally or if at all buys that. I'd love to see some interesting, some credible polling data on that. But within the media, that is a prevalent belief, or at least a belief that they have to pretend is the case, because that's the accepted narrative, and to go against it is dangerous for them.
It's interesting you say that, but when you I mean, obviously you're on Twitter because I literally, I mean, I follow you on Twitter. I've literally followed and read and watched everything you've done since 2019 because I was really, really taken with your professionalism, especially in this matter. On Twitter, there are still a lot of people that buy the narrative. There is still just blatant lies by the media. Just a quick one. I'll give you a quick example. Obviously, you know that the Jackson estate is now in litigation with HBO. Mm-hmm. Now, the Jackson estate were very smart in basically showing that they wanted a public arbitration. So they wanted everything to be in the public. The media basically said the Jackson estate wants a private arbitration. Dan Reed jumped on the bandwagon and also said the Jackson estate wanted a private arbitration behind closed doors. So I normally don't engage, but I had to go on there and say, hold on a second. Here is a legal document that says the Jackson estate wants a public arbitration. Why is it impossible for you people to just tell the truth? It's just, it's remarkable, honestly. John, I really, really appreciate you doing this. I could talk about this till next week because more than anything, people always say things like Jackson fans are only defending him because they like their music. No sane person will defend a pedophile, okay? It's just that there is so much exculpatory evidence out there that just gets completely ignored, that when I found out what was going on and when I started following you, and I'm thinking, hold on a second, what these guys are saying makes sense. What Charles Thompson is saying makes sense. This is a guy who's won awards for exposing pedophile rings, for Pete's sake, and yet they don't get any traffic. And I'm thinking something is clearly wrong. Who is behind, or what is behind this constant narrative, this false narrative that this is what's going on? Aphrodite Jones couldn't get a publisher to publish a pro-Jackson book after the trial, that she was turned down. So I don't know what you think, whether you think there's more going on behind the scenes than we realize. I don't want to kind of delve into any kind of conspiracy theories. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm not a conspiracy person at all. However, having met with two of the Jackson attorneys at the time, one of them, Howard Weitzman, is no longer with us.
It's no longer, yes.
I can say, and I've referenced this publicly before, I do think that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. I kind of implied that with Oprah's involvement in the story. Mm-hmm. I think she was brought in as part of, I've referred to it previously as a Game of Thrones type of situation.
Yeah, I remember you saying that. Yes.
That and I don't make that kind of statement idly or without basis. There was a little bit of a mafia thing going on where, you take one of yours, we'll take one of, one of ours, we'll take one of yours.
Okay.
And people can probably even figure this out for themselves if they look at some of the headlines involving HBO in this time period. It was not hidden. I don't feel comfortable articulating all of it. I don't even claim to fully understand it all. But there was a lot going on publicly with regard to who was being taken out and how they were being taken out that may have played a direct role in HBO's incentive structure here, although that incentive structure may have changed because they're under new ownership now.
Oh, really?
Let me just say one other thing about the HBO lawsuit. It has always been my opinion, and I don't have any special knowledge here, but to me, the key part of the HBO lawsuit, which I think has merit based upon my understanding of the contract that Michael Jackson had with HBO, mm-hmm. as far as not being defamed into perpetuity, basically. Mm-hmm. To me, the most important part of this is the discovery. See, to me, and
Yes.
I think I told the Jackson lawyers this, and they probably already knew this, but I strongly believe that if the Jackson estate gets full discovery of everything that went into Leaving Neverland, then Dan Reed is cooked, because here's what they're going to find, and I know this purely as not even someone who investigated this case, but simply as a documentary filmmaker myself. I mean, I've made 3 rather prominent documentary films. The number one thing as a documentary filmmaker you look at, it's not just the bias and the unfairness. From a technical standpoint, there are so many camera moves while Safechuck and Robson are telling key parts of their story. And you might be wondering, well, what difference does that make? As a documentary filmmaker, you don't know when the key moment in someone's story is going to happen unless it's scripted. And so for there to be major camera moves at critical points in the story, to me, says this was not shot as a documentary. This was shot as a fictional movie with a script, effectively, where they did multiple takes. Because, I mean, if you look at a normal documentary, you might have multiple cameras if you've got a lot of money, but you don't do, it's a static shot. Because if you're doing a real interview with somebody that's based in truth, you don't know when the good part's going to come. You don't know. It's going to come out of nowhere sometimes. So you would never go, all right, hold on, we're going to do this dramatic, sweeping, camera move right in the, because you might screw it up, right? Because a camera move comes with risk. Because so if Robson's telling the key part of his story and we just magically decided to do a camera move right when that happens and we screw up, so now we've just lost the key part of the story, unless you're willing to do multiple takes. One, you know it's coming, and 2, so at the very least, I'm positive that Reed said, okay, Wade, we're going to talk about that time when you were forced to engage in this horrendous sex act with Michael Jackson, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this camera move, and let's do it, and let's go take 1. Okay. And because there's no other way you could do this logistically, and so I believe that if they get full discovery, that's all going to be on tape somewhere, unless they destroyed it. And
sorry, I need to put this in before I forget. He has actually claimed that the camera broke in as part of the litigation. Not only did he try to hide behind the California Shield law, he also claimed that his camera broke. So I would guess that those outtakes are gone.
Well, again, I'm just telling you that, and by the way, that to me is consistent with my theory, right?
No, absolutely.
Because he's very afraid of the full behind the scenes, footage being revealed. Because I am positive that if that was ever revealed, you would see this was not a documentary, that this was shot like a scripted film, and take 1. All right, this is oral sex, take 3. I mean, whatever it is. I mean, that's what this would be.
Oh, right, John, don't kill me, please.
James, we didn't really like the way you told the wedding ring story last time. Let's try it a little bit differently this time. And action. I mean, that's the way this would be, and that's not a documentary.
You're actually a genius, I have to say, because there is actually an incident where there's a scene where it turns out they went back, I think 17 months later,
right?
If to make it a composite of the same shot. But Eagle Eye Jackson fans noticed that the shrubbery outside was different, so it was a different period in time. So it just goes to show you that you're spot on, John. You are actually spot on in that these was done methodically, and more importantly, we actually have Reed on tape correcting Robson. When Robson says friend, Reed corrects him and says lover. And I remember when I saw that, I was like, okay, that's odd. Why would you be correcting someone? I mean, it's their story, not yours. So if he says friend, clearly he meant friend. And what do you think? Sorry, I mean, I wanted to end this earlier. What do you think about Reed appointing himself as their spokesperson? I mean, it's very odd. What's your view on that?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I have said that numerous times where I've never seen a documentary filmmaker become the spokesperson and PR person. And by the way, not just speaking on behalf of their cause, but correcting their story in the media for them. We already alluded to that with regard to Safechuck and the train station. To me, you know what it's like? It's much more like the director of a fictional film, because a director of a fictional film has ownership of all the content because it came from him or her. Okay. So if Martin Scorsese gets asked about the performance of an actor in a film, he's responsible for that. So it makes sense for him to be the spokesperson or the PR person. It does not make sense when it's a documentary, especially when you've got two adults who can speak for themselves. And so I think it's very telling. I think it's very telling that this was not a documentary. This was a fictional film.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think it was very odd that they went into hiding pretty much as soon as the film came out. They did the Oprah show and just disappeared into the ether. And Dan Reed took it upon himself to basically be their spokesman. And I thought, this is just very, very, very strange. You know, I actually engaged him fairly recently where he posted a comment on Twitter essentially saying that Jackson paid money to stop legal proceedings. And I went on Twitter and I said, well, actually, Jackson settled a civil suit. And you would actually know this if you did your homework. It's different. It was almost like they were trying to infer that settling the civil suits stopped the accuser from testifying in a criminal proceedings. No such thing could ever happen because it's legal. It's illegal. It will be bribery or suborning a witness or whatever you want to call it. So clearly the fact that Jackson settled the civil suit has no bearing on the criminal investigation at all. But Reed, being Reed, he puts it out there and people swallow it. And he actually responded. And so I bombarded him with a lot of your work, actually. I post your articles all the time. I post your clip from Glenn Beck, where you actually mentioned the fact that Wade Robson was found to have lied so egregiously during the discovery process that the judge threw out his entire testimony. So honestly, all I can say is thank you very much for just being a journalist in a world of Sorry, carry on. Sorry.
No, well, thank you for your kind words, and it's nice that someone cares and someone appreciates it, and
very much.
And thank you for your knowledge of this case, which is extraordinary. And so it's been a good conversation. Thank you so much.
It's been a fantastic conversation, John. Thank you very much, and I will continue to follow you on Twitter and shout for the cause, because I think that my channel here is about curiosity and knowledge and understanding, and I think that the whole Jackson allegation, we need to have all the data. That's all we care about here. So honestly, thank you very much for being for doing what you do. There are not many of you. You're probably one of 5 on the entire planet. But thank you very much for agreeing to do this, and I'm sure I will speak to you soon. And for all the viewers, please like and subscribe. And I believe that you're at Zygmunt on Twitter.
Zygmunt Freud. Zygmunt Freud.
On Twitter. I'm going to post links to all the articles that you wrote and links to some of your previous interviews as well, because this is true journalism. And I hope that if there are other people who want to be journalists, they can watch this and use this as inspiration, if you like. Thank you very much, John. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'm not going to keep you any longer because trust me, I'm tempted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We did.